Here are 4 common signs that mean God is asking you something. Number 1, if you're hiding a particular part of your life from God, this could be a sign God is asking you a question. Throughout the Bible, God is found asking people questions. By studying this pattern, however, we can see that God's not asking these people questions because he wanted to know the answer. Rather, he asked these people questions so that they would become aware of the answer to the question that he was asking. Perhaps the most famous example of this occurs in Genesis chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. Adam and Eve had sinned against God, and then it says,
"And they heard the sound of God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, 'Where are you?'" Again, God knew where they were. He just wanted them to know where they were. He wanted them to evaluate their situation. Because they sinned, they were now hiding from God. I find it interesting that in Genesis 3, verse 7, it states, "Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths." But then in Genesis 3:21, it also states, "And the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skin and clothed them." Reading these 2 verses together is interesting because it shows they tried to cover themselves, but God made them better clothes to cover themselves. This has been the pattern ever since sin entered the world. We sin, we try to deal with it ourselves, but God knows that's not going to work, so he provides the solution himself.
This is one of the reasons it's so important to not hide yourself from God. When you hide from God, you're hiding yourself from the solution that only God can provide. You'll try to solve your problem in your own power, but that never works. Our solutions are always insufficient. Never hide from God. He always sees the truth anyways. He doesn't need you to hide anything from him because there's nothing that he can't handle. Bring everything to him. He alone has what you need. Number 2, if you've grown cynical about receiving something you know God could provide, this is a good sign God is asking you a question. In the waiting, one of the greatest dangers is that you begin to lose your hope in God. In Genesis 18, verses 9 through 15, it states,
"They said to him, 'Where is Sarah, your wife?' And he said, 'She is in the tent.' The Lord said, 'I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son.' And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of woman had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, 'After I am worn out, and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?' The Lord said to Abraham, 'Why did Sarah laugh and say, Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son.' But Sarah denied it, saying, 'I did not laugh,' for she was afraid. He said, 'No, but you did laugh.'" The fact that God knew when Sarah laughed in the tent is evidence God knew where she was. So why did he ask, "Where is Sarah your wife?"
Perhaps God made Sarah feel like she was out of his sight in the tent so that he could draw out the issues within her heart that he wanted to correct. God knew why Sarah laughed. He knew there was doubt in her heart, but he wanted her to know this about herself. It seems he set her up so that she would do something externally that would be a reflection of what was going on internally. He asked, why did she laugh, so that she could become aware of the doubt that had grown inside of her. Likewise, if you've become cynical towards God because it's been such a long wait for the thing that you know God could provide, this could be a sign that God is asking you a question. Why are you doubting me? Is anything too hard for me? I'm not promising you that God will do what it is you want him to do. What I am promising you is that God has the power to do what it is you want him to do. Never allow your heart to grow cynical towards God. He loves you. Never forget that. Number 3, If you've been stuck in a bad emotional place for a long time, this could be a sign God is asking you a question. God has blessed humans with an incredible ability to adapt and overcome. For example, when wars occur, people end up overcoming obstacles that they never thought they would be able to overcome. They go through things they never thought they would be able to get through. Or perhaps a mother gives birth to a child with special needs. Over the years that will follow, this mom will make sacrifices that she never thought she could. In love of her child, she will adapt to all kinds of situations she may never have believed she would have been able to do. Or perhaps you thought you'd be married by now, but decades later, after your internal timeline had passed, you now have grown content in singleness. You've maybe even started to thrive in singleness, and you never thought you would have been able to. But one danger in adapting, which is a very good thing, but one danger that comes along with it is that we can begin to lose our hope in God. Through adapting, we can begin to settle into the trials that we were forced into. We can become complacent and stop believing God's best. While God does want us to adapt and overcome to the issues that we encounter so that we can survive and thrive in life even when there are issues and imperfections, God also does not want us to lose our belief in His power that He can solve the root issues that caused us to need to adapt to begin with. One example of this can be seen in John chapter 5, verses 5 through 9.
One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Why would Jesus ask a sick person, "Do you want to be healed?" The answer seems obvious, but notice the information provided before Jesus asked this question. It states one man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The longer the wait for something good from God, the harder it is to believe God can still do it. Jesus probably had to ask this man if he wanted to get well because this man had probably adapted to his issue so long and gave up the hope of ever being healed. You would think his immediate answer to Jesus would be, "Yes, I want to be healed." But instead, he gave Jesus a reason for why it was impossible.
If you've begun to think something is impossible because you've been forced to adapt so long to something you didn't want, and now you're beginning to lose hope in God's ability to solve that problem that you had to adapt to, this could be a sign God is asking you a question. Do you want to get well? Do you want me to help you? And number 4, if you've been tempted to follow the masses instead of our master, this is a good sign God is asking you a question. As Christians, there's always going to be a battle for our attention. Are we going to keep focused on God, or are we going to start following the crowd? Notice the question Jesus asked in Luke 9, verses 18 through 20.
Now it happened that as he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he asked them, "Who do the crowd say that I am?" And they answered, "John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and others that one of the prophets of old has risen." Then he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered, "The Christ of God."
If you want to follow Christ, you have to prepare yourself to be the minority on earth. Sin will make us want to follow the crowd so that we can be accepted by our peers. But when we start falling into this temptation, God will ask us, "But who do you say that I am?" When we are reminded that Jesus is the Christ of God, we will remember that our hearts belong to Him, and thus He deserves all of our devotion in life. Notice what Jesus said just a few verses later in Luke 9:23 through 26.
And he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in his glory, and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels.
So if you've been tempted to follow the crowds rather than Jesus, this is a good sign God is asking you, but who do you say that I am? So that you can remember your heart is fully God's and you're willing to follow Him no matter what. Is God saying yes, no, or wait to you? I answer that question in these 3 videos right here in this playlist. I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, God bless.